Let's get started with 4.1. Our next term is Peso de Ocho. All right, Peso de Ocho is a very significant term because this is the coin, silver coin, that Spain is able to produce in the New World. As the Spanish exploration goes to the New World, Spain finds silver, and they find an abundant amount of silver in areas, especially like Bolivia, Peru, and Mexico. One area where they find an abundant amount of silver is Potosi. Potosi in modern-day Bolivia, is what it looks like today, is basically a mountain of silver, where there's silver inside of it. The Spanish are able to take this silver, produce it into their coins, and use this to open up trade with China and many other places in the world. Now this is huge, because what happens is silver is actually more important than gold at this point. This coin, the Chinese will trade for it. So Spain has been looking for a way to trade with China, and China does not want to trade with them. They're the Middle Kingdom. They want Spain to kowtow and bow before them. But when Spain has the silver coin, China will trade for this silver coin, and they will trade as many goods as they can. China becomes flooded with this silver coin. So do many other places, and this becomes basically like the global currency in the world, the Peso de Ocho. And because Spain is able to produce it using slave labor from native indigenous people in places like Bolivia, Mexico, and Peru, they're able to get this silver, take it from their colonies in the Americas, trade with Spain, and get riches, and this will make Spain into a major power, and there will be tons of silver flooded all over the world on the backs of the indigenous labor of the people of Bolivia, Mexico, and other places. Also, the Peso de Ocho, the way they mined it, and they mixed it with mercury so they could make the silver-making process go faster, which killed a huge number of indigenous people who were already dying from diseases like smallpox, measles, and influenza. The main thing is the people in the Americas lose their wealth because the Spain take it. China starts giving more goods to Spain, and Spain gains many riches, and this allows Spain to become a world power, which leads other European powers to as well in the early modern era. All right, let's get our next one, which is the city of Manila. Manila was very connected on the silver trade, the Spanish galleon. Now, what happened is you would have the mining going down here in Bolivia and Potosi, some of it going on in Peru, and then the ships would come to Mexico. A lot of the mining would go in places like Guanajuato, Mexico as well, as they would mine the silver. And then was brought to, one of the first spots was Manila. And Manila is where a lot of the trade took place between China and the Spanish, as they would trade goods for silver, among many other things. And they started calling these ships the Manila galleons, because they would go back and forth from Manila. And Manila was a place that the Spanish were able to take over in the Philippines, part of their empire, as part of their silver trade with China, as Spain was able to grow in power. So, pretty bad here. Spanish, using indigenous labor, taking over this area, taking the silver, then taking over this area, Manila, in the Philippines, using that for trade with China to enrich themselves. That's pretty significant. All right, the Atlantic system. The Atlantic system used to be called the triangular trade. Now we use the term Atlantic system more. Basically, Europeans, what happened was they realized that as they were taking over the Americas, enslaving the native people, using them to gain cash crops like sugar and tobacco and gold, many of the natives were dying. So they wanted to replace them with a labor force. They got this labor force from Africa, as they would take the slaves who were traded and then were brought to places like the Americas and Brazil, the Caribbean, and some to the United States. Now 70% went to the Caribbean and Brazil. And most of the slavery was for producing cash crops like sugar and tobacco. Now, what the system did was it also enriched Europe heavily, as they would bring some manufactured goods, trade them to Africa for the slaves. The slaves would grow the cash crops, which were crops like sugar, which were from the Old World, were brought to the New World in the Columbian Exchange, and tobacco, and Europe was able to sell that. This greatly enriched powers like Spain and Portugal, and then later England and France as well, as this Atlantic system basically gave them a cheap labor force the African people who were then brought in a diaspora to the Americas. And this is why many places like Haiti, Jamaica, Cuba have very large African populations, with Brazil, as well as our African American population that exists in the United States as well. That is the Atlantic system. The Taj Mahal. The Taj Mahal was built by Shah Jahan, who was a ruler of the Mughal dynasty in India. It is a mausoleum, or a place where he buried his wife who died. Now, the Taj Mahal is an amazing building. The architecture structure uses combination, cultural diffusion of Hinduism and Islam. Now, Shah Jahan was a Muslim ruler. The Mughal dynasty in India was a Islamic dynasty that ruled India. They had cultural tolerance for Hindus, but they were a Muslim dynasty that ruled India. It is one of the most impressive and known buildings in the world. Again, syncretism between Hinduism and Islam in the architecture. Also, something of significance for this building, it was paid for mostly with Spanish silver, showing the interconnectedness of global trade and how the Spanish silver was reaching areas, not just reaching areas like India, but was also used as a currency, as the money of India. So Spanish silver, again, the Peso de Ojo, becomes the world currency, and we can see it with the Taj Mahal as well, as that's what Shah Jahan used to pay for this magnificent building to his wife. A joint stock company. These were started in Europe. The two examples we'll look at are the British East Indian Company and the Dutch East Indian Company. But a joint stock company is basically a group of investors or a group of people who want to put their money in. What they do is they don't want to say, okay, we have India out there. We want to, get as much tea and other things that we can sell as much as possible. We want to put out a bunch of ships over there. But if one person pays for it and the company fails, one person loses everything. So what you do is you get a group of people, a joint group of people who all say, I'll put some money in, 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 I'll put some money in. And you sell these pieces of paper, which are called stock, or a percentage of the company. Maybe you sell someone 1% of the company, someone else 5% of the company, someone else 10% of the company, and then they own that percentage of the company. So I buy 10% of this company, I get 10% of the profits. However, the colony goes under. If the product we're trying to get doesn't make it, the business goes under, I lose my money. But I don't lose everything. I just lose the money I paid for. So what happened in this era was that people would go in boats to other places in the world, whether India or the United States, and they would try to make money off of these colonies, usually by growing cash crops like tea, sugar, or tobacco. And they would grow these cash crops and try to make money off them. And then if I got a profit, all right, they're making a lot of money, I get 10% of the profits. So jointly investing many people to try to make money. Now, at this time, they tried to make a profit, so they didn't see a problem with slavery. So many people who own these joint stock companies would use slave labor or labor that was very close to slave labor, especially in places like India, to increase their profits to try to make more money. Joint stock companies are very important because it got more people involved, and we start seeing these private businesses that the governments basically say, okay, you can do this, we'll help you, but you're private companies going out there trying to make money. The British East Indian Company, for example, is practically running India in the early modern period, which is pretty amazing. So let's take a look at a couple of these companies a little more closely for our next definitions. The British East Indian Company, also known as the EIC. Remember this symbol. It's a symbol for them. It could show up on the AP exam. Begins in 1600, as your reading here says, and the British government gave 218 investors a royal monopoly of all trade east of the Cape of Good Hope. Basically, they were interested in the trade in India, primarily in tea, but with some other goods as well. Now, what happens is basically the British East Indian Company goes into India. The Mughal dynasty is starting to become weaker at this time. And many of these investors start making deals with local people in the Mughal dynasty. They make deals with them where they can come in, they can make some trade, they make some money off this. The British Crown or the British government gives permission to the British East Indian Company and gives them some naval assistance as well. And after a while, they start making deals, they start making money, they start investing more in India. Pretty soon, they start funding their own armies. And before you know it, the British East Indian Company has control over large parts of India. A lot of India is basically under this control of a private company, the British East Indian Company, with their own military. That is under Britain, but doesn't really rule as being under Britain. They're kind of private, doing their own thing, but they also have the British government supporting them as long as they're bringing money back and the British government can keep taxing them. So the British East Indian Company is able to get a monopoly on tea from India, other spices, other goods as well, and is able to make a lot of money off of India. So this becomes a very big company. And there's another company as well during this time, is the Dutch East Indian Company, known as the VOC from a Dutch translation. The VOC, this symbol again is important. It means the Dutch East Indian Company. Now, they started off being much bigger. They had 10 times the resources of their British counterparts. And again, the EIC and the VOC, both of these are joint stock companies. So they are able to go into many places in Southeast Asia and are able to start dominating the spice trade that exists in Southeast Asia. The Dutch East Indian Company is able to go into many of these regions. They're able to bring out spices, many other goods from this area, trade them back and forth, and they're moving back and forth here in the old former Indian Ocean Trade Network, the VOC, now this private company, just like the EIC, and they're able to bring money back to Amsterdam, which is the capital of this new Dutch empire that is growing. The VOC is a private company. It is a joint stock company, but this private company is able to have huge influence in the Indian Ocean trade route and bring these goods back to the Dutch. Significant because they're able to get a hold of a lot of trade. The Portuguese originally come in, they build their trade empire in here. Then the Dutch are able to come in and take a lot of it away. And then the British, too, are able to come into India. And we start seeing this Indian Ocean trade route from 1450 to 1750 kind of changing hands, where China had a lot of power, the Mughal Empire had a lot of power, the Swahili city-states did, to now more of European dominance that continues to grow throughout the early modern era. Not to mention that Spain is also coming in at the same time with their silver, and a lot of these silver coins are becoming the currency of this trade network, as we see a big change from 1450 to 1750 in this trade route, especially in the Indian Ocean. So the VOC and the EIC are both limited liability companies. Joint stock companies use limited liability. Limited liability is this concept that not one person has to take all the responsibility. One person's not running this company. It is limited liability, which means if I own 1% of the company, if it fails, I lose just that 1% that I put into it. So if someone else buys a whole bunch, if it makes it, they get more money. But if they lose money. It's like buying stock today, limited liability. If I want to go buy stock in Apple, so Apple is selling, let's say, $50 a share for Apple. When I buy that $50 on the stock market, which exists in New York, what happens is I'm investing in Apple. I'm a part owner of the company, a very small owner, but I own part of the company. If Apple does well, my stock goes up. If Apple does bad, my stock goes down. So these companies were basically the beginning of what will become the stock market. They're joint stock companies, which means they just sell part of themselves so more people can invest and they can make money. And more people in, both for the Dutch and more British people, invest in these, so we get more private investment, which grows with these companies. And again, they're interested in making profits. Unfortunately, a lot of making these profits is using pretty ruthless means, like slave labor, for example, definitely from Africa, and also very, very cheap labor from people like peasants, and taking advantage and exploiting the workers as well. I missed one word, but Atlantic System's on there twice, so it's not too bad. New Amsterdam's on here. You basically just need to know that New Amsterdam is New York City today. The Dutch West Indian Company founded it, and it grows along with private companies and joint stock companies as well. Significant because it'll become a major trade city in the future. Not so much in this time period, more it'll become in the modern era. Well, that's all. We made it through the vocab words. In Peru right now, Sure, I'm having a blast. I'll talk to you guys later.